I can still remember that rainy afternoon as vividly as if it were yesterday. The sky was a dark, moody gray, and a relentless downpour had drenched me to the bone by the time I reached the doorstep of my house. My shoes squelched with every step. My school bag clung to my back like a wet rag, and all I wanted was to get warm again. As soon as I opened the door and stepped inside, I was greeted not with a warm smile, but with my mother's usual no-nonsense voice barking, "Mark, upstairs, now! You're dripping all over my clean floor." I didn't argue. I knew better than to challenge her when she was in one of those moods. I trudged up the stairs, water trailing behind me, and within moments found myself submerged in a steaming hot bath that quickly began to soothe my chilled skin. The warmth of the water made me forget about school, about the weather, about everything. For a while, I just sat there in silence, watching little ripples form around my knees, feeling the tension dissolve into the rising steam. But comfort is a fleeting thing. Soon the water began to cool, and I decided it was time to get out. That's when I realized something very inconvenient. There were no towels in the bathroom. I shouted for my mom, my voice echoing off the tiled walls. "Mom, there's no towels in here. What do I do?" Her reply came sharply from downstairs, accompanied by the sound of rustling laundry. "Hold your horses, Mark." "I did the wash today. I'll bring one up." A minute later, there was a knock on the door. I cracked it open just enough to reach an arm through, hiding behind it as she handed me a thick, fluffy towel. "Don't take too long. Tea's almost ready," she said before vanishing again. The towel was warm, clearly just pulled from the dryer, and full of static electricity. Tiny hairs on my arm stood up at attention as I wrapped it around myself. But then, as I was drying off, I noticed something caught in the folds of the towel. It was a pair of my sister's panties, stuck to the fabric by static. This wasn't the first time this had happened. Normally, I would have tossed them to the side without a second thought. But that day, something strange, something subtle and inexplicable, came over me. I stood there, dripping slightly, holding the delicate garment between my fingers, feeling the texture of the fabric. Softer, smoother, far more refined than the coarse, boyish briefs I was used to. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was rebellion. Maybe it was something I hadn't yet found the words to describe. But instead of dropping them, I slowly, almost timidly, slipped them on. As they glided up my legs and hugged my hips, I was struck by how differently they felt, how gently they held me, how they seemed to conform to me in a way my own underwear never had. There was no immediate jolt of guilt, no alarm bells in my head, only an odd kind of comfort, as if I had just slipped into something that had been waiting for me all along. I threw on my dressing gown and padded downstairs to eat dinner, feeling a little thrill in my chest, a small secret nestled against my skin. After dinner, I ran upstairs and lost myself in computer games, distracted from the world, until my dad's voice called me back to reality. "Mark," he said, appearing in the doorway, "you better turn that off. It's getting late. School tomorrow." I pleaded for a few more minutes, and as always, he relented, giving me 15. I made good on the deal and was in bed before he came back to check. I snuggled under my covers, still wearing my sister's panties, not thinking much of it at all. The fabric was so soft, so soothing, that I drifted off to sleep without even realizing I still had them on. Morning came with a jolt. I awoke to the familiar light filtering through my curtains, the hum of life beginning in the house, and a sudden awareness that I was still wearing her underwear. I shot up in bed, a little panicked but not exactly ashamed. Instead, I just reached for my dressing gown and headed to the bathroom. I locked the door and began washing up, trying to shake the fog of sleep from my mind when a familiar voice rang out from the hallway. "Hurry up, you little freak, or you'll make me late!" That was Sarah, my older sister, 2 grades ahead, full of sarcasm and teenage superiority. She had a way of calling me names that felt more like ritual than insult, She wasn't cruel exactly. She just had her own way of asserting her dominance. I ignored the jab, quickly stripped off the panties and stuffed them behind a towel as I washed up. But in my rush, I had forgotten all about them. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the bathroom, looking vaguely annoyed, and we sat down for breakfast. All seemed normal, until Mom came downstairs, holding the very panties I'd worn. She looked directly at Sarah, frustration etched into her face. "Sarah," she said sternly, "how many times do I have to tell you to pick up your clothes from the bathroom?" Sarah's mouth opened in protest, but Mom cut her off mid-sentence. "No more buts! Next time I find anything of yours in there, you're grounded. Got it?" Sarah mumbled something submissive, and I couldn't help but chuckle into my cereal. Her glare nearly burned a hole through me. "I don't suppose you know how my panties got there, do you?" she asked sharply. I kept laughing, putting on my most innocent face. "How would I know?" I said with a shrug. She rolled her eyes and stomped away. I did feel a small pang of guilt. After all, she was taking the blame for something I'd done. But the look on her face had been priceless. After breakfast, I got dressed for school, back in my usual itchy boys' underwear. As I walked to school, the difference between the scratchy elastic digging into my sides and the soft silkiness from the night before was impossible to ignore. By lunchtime, the itching had gotten so bad that I couldn't even sit still. At recess, I made a beeline for the toilets and ducked into a cubicle. What I saw when I pulled my pants down shocked me to my core. My skin was red, irritated, inflamed, and incredibly sore. At just 10 years old, I didn't know how to handle that kind of fear. I started to cry, quiet sobs echoing off the walls. When the bell rang, I couldn't move. I just stayed huddled in that cubicle, alone and confused, until I heard the firm voice of the school principal, Mr. Wenner, echo through the bathroom. "Mark Jania, are you in here?" he called. I froze, unsure if I should respond. My silence didn't last long. He must have heard me shifting or sniffling. Soon he was knocking gently on my stall. "Can we expect you to come out of there anytime soon, Mark?" he asked. My voice barely above a whisper, I replied, "Yes, sir," and shakily pulled my pants back up. As I stepped out, the pain hit me like a wall. I collapsed, unable to walk properly. Mr. Wenner, confused and alarmed, yelled for the nurse. 2 hours later, I was lying in the infirmary, wrapped in cool sheets, learning that I'd had an allergic reaction to the fabric of my underwear. Something in the material didn't agree with my skin. The doctors recommended that I wear softer materials, ones similar to what girls typically wore, until the rash cleared. In other words, I was going to have to wear panties. When Sarah heard, she burst out laughing. "Finally," she said with a wicked grin, "I get a little sister instead of a freaky brother. Should we call you Marcia now?" I was mortified, but before I could react, Mom shut her down. "That's enough, Sarah," she snapped. "Mark doesn't need your teasing. Get out of here until you have something useful to say." Sarah left, muttering under her breath, while Mom knelt beside me, holding a bottle of lotion and giving me a sympathetic look. "Let's get you feeling better, sweetheart," she said softly. She helped me upstairs and into the bathroom, where I stripped, and she gently applied the soothing lotion to my raw skin. The relief was instant. I looked at her as she handed me a fresh pair of the new, softer underwear she'd bought. "It's temporary," she said, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't entirely sure. 10 minutes later, I was in my room when Sarah knocked on the door. I expected another insult. Instead, she looked sad. "I'm sorry, Mark," she said, her voice unusually quiet. I nodded, still wary, but invited her in. She sat beside me on the bed and hugged me. "I was being stupid," she said. "It's just, usually only girls wear stuff like that. Or boys who, want to be girls. But you're not like that, are you?" I shook my head, unsure of what to say. She hugged me tighter. "I've got your back," she whispered. "Anyone messes with you, they'll deal with me." When she left, her words echoed in my mind. Boys who want to be girls, Was that what this was? Did it mean something was wrong with me? I didn't know. I only knew that I had liked the way the panties felt. And now, that secret was out in the open. That night, as I lay in bed, the soft fabric of the new underwear hugging my body, I couldn't stop thinking about what Sarah had said, about boys who wanted to be girls. I turned the words over and over in my mind, trying to understand what they meant and why they stirred something so confusing inside me. Was I being punished for trying on her panties? Was this some strange cosmic justice? The thought gnawed at me, clawing deeper with each passing minute. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Not Sarah, not Mom, definitely not Dad. I imagined the looks on their faces if I told them how I felt wearing the panties, how strangely right they had felt, how they made me feel like something inside me had finally settled into place. The shame of even thinking that was enough to drive me into tears, and as my pillow soaked beneath my cheek, I drifted into a restless sleep filled with twisted, surreal dreams. In them, I wasn't just wearing panties, I was a girl. People called me Marcia, not Mark, and I could feel myself changing, my body shifting, my reflection in the mirror no longer familiar. I screamed in the dream, refusing the transformation, trying to claw back my identity. "I'm not a girl! You can't make me!" I shouted, only to be swallowed by my own echo. I bolted upright in bed, soaked in sweat and panic, my breath short and sharp. Before I could even catch it, my hand was already yanking the panties down and flinging them across the room as if they were the source of the nightmare. I barely had time to steady myself before Sarah burst through the door, eyes wide with concern. "Mark, what happened?" she asked, rushing to my side. I couldn't answer. Not really. I just leaned into her as she hugged me tight, rocking slightly as my trembling slowed. Mom and Dad followed soon after, and I gave them the only explanation I could think of. I had a bad dream. It seemed to satisfy them, or maybe they just didn't want to dig too deeply. Either way, they let it go, and I was left alone once again, staring up at the ceiling, afraid to fall back asleep. I didn't sleep at all that night. I was terrified that the dream would return, that I would once again find myself being turned into something I didn't understand. My mind raced with questions. Was this just a phase? Was it my fault? Had I somehow broken a rule too sacred to be spoken aloud? The next morning, groggy and irritable from lack of sleep, I snapped at everyone. My parents chalked it up to the rash and the general discomfort, and in an act of mercy, or maybe just to spare themselves, they let me stay home from school. That suited me just fine. I crawled back into bed and stared at the ceiling, but exhaustion got the better of me, and soon I was dreaming again. This time, the dream didn't sneak up on me. It stormed in with cruel clarity. I was at school, dressed in a pale yellow dress that fluttered with every step. The boys, older, louder, crueler, laughed as they circled me, taunting, teasing, lifting the hem of my dress to expose my panties. No matter how tightly I held it down, their hands found a way, and their mocking chants filled my ears. "Little girl doesn't want us to see her frilly knickers," they jeered, and I broke down, tears streaming down my face. "I'm not a girl," I kept saying over and over, but no one listened. When I woke up, my cheeks were wet, and I was hugging my pillow like it was the last piece of safety I had in the world. The dream had shaken me, not just because of the humiliation, but because somewhere deep down, a part of me didn't hate the feeling of the dress brushing against my legs, or the sound of the word panties being associated with me. That terrified me more than anything else. The fear of being caught, of being teased, of being labeled something I didn't yet understand, pushed me into action. I decided that the only way out of this confusion was to get rid of the new underwear. If they weren't there, I couldn't wear them, and maybe the dreams would stop. But how could I throw them out without my parents noticing? Then it hit me. If they were just like Sarah's, she could have them. I gathered every pair I could find and snuck into her room, placing them neatly in her dresser as if they had always belonged there. It felt strangely satisfying to be rid of them, like I was closing the door on something dangerous. I returned to my room and started playing computer games, hoping to distract myself, but the exhaustion caught up again and soon I was asleep once more. This time, the dreams were mercifully normal. No dresses, no teasing, no confusion, just the comforting void of imagined worlds and pixelated adventures. When I woke up, Sarah was on the phone, her voice carrying down the hall, and Mom was in the kitchen making tea. "Did you have a good sleep?" she asked when I entered. I nodded. "Yeah, thanks, Mom." She smiled and patted my shoulder. "Good. I hope you won't be any trouble for your sister tonight." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Your father and I are going out tonight, don't you remember?" I didn't. Or maybe I had tried to forget. "I guess I forgot," I mumbled. I left the kitchen feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Sarah wasn't exactly the most compassionate babysitter, and with how things had been between us lately, I wasn't sure what to expect. As the evening wore on, I sat in front of the TV watching cartoons, trying to forget everything. I was so engrossed in the show that I didn't hear Mom approaching. "Mark," she said, poking her head into the room, "time to put on the lotion." I groaned. "Can't it wait?" "The show's almost over." She narrowed her eyes. "Fine, but Sarah will have to do it." My head snapped around. "No way, she's not touching me there." "Then upstairs. Now." The TV blinked off with a click, and I sulked upstairs to the bathroom, dragging my feet like I was headed for execution. As soon as I pulled down my pajama pants, Mom's face changed. "Mark," she said with a sigh, "where's your new underwear?" I hesitated, trying to think of a lie, but nothing came. "You know what the doctor said. You need to wear them until the rash is gone. Or do you want to stay like this forever?" I stood there, caught between shame and fear, until she applied the lotion and sent me off with strict instructions to come back wearing the new underwear. But of course, I knew where they were. Back in Sarah's room. I crept in, hoping she wasn't around, and began digging through her drawers. Just as I found them, the door opened. Sarah stood there, staring at me, eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of me holding a fistful of panties. "What do you think you're doing with my underwear, you little freak?" she shouted. "Give them back." I opened my mouth to explain, but she yanked them from my hands and shoved me out. Mom was waiting outside the bathroom when the yelling drew her attention. "Mark," she said, exasperated, "what's going on now?" I couldn't avoid it. I blurted the truth, or at least my version of it. "Only girls wear panties, Mom. You can't make me become a girl." Her expression hardened into something I rarely saw. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "The doctor said you need them. This isn't about becoming anything. It's about healing. Now get in your room." Minutes later, she came in holding the underwear I'd abandoned. "Put them on," she said firmly. I obeyed without argument. I could tell by her voice that any protest would only make things worse. She watched as I put them on and then placed the rest on my dresser. "Put those away properly," she instructed before leaving. When she called me down for tea later, I nearly ran to the table. The tension in the house was unbearable. Sarah sat across from me, glaring daggers, and I tried not to look at her. Mom and Dad left shortly after dinner, and as soon as the door clicked shut behind them, Sarah exploded. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" she hissed. "Everything you do ends up making my life harder. I get yelled at because you're too busy playing dress-up. I get punished while you get sympathy. I wish I didn't even have a little freak for a brother." Her words stung more than I expected, and after that, she didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. In fact, she barely acknowledged me for the next week. It was as if I had become invisible. During that time, the rash slowly cleared, and I returned to wearing my regular underwear. But something had changed. Even as I resumed my old routines, I found myself missing the feel of those softer garments. I never said anything, of course. I couldn't. But when Mom told me I could throw the panties away, I hesitated. I didn't want to. I pretended to toss them and instead hid them, burying them under a pile of old toys in the back of my closet. Over the next few months, I wore them whenever I had the chance, carefully, secretly, always making sure not to get caught. But secrets wear thin. The panties began to fall apart. I had been washing them by hand, drying them under my bed, doing everything I could to preserve them, but they weren't meant to last. And when they finally tore, I felt like I'd lost something important. Unable to let go, I began borrowing Sarah's panties again. Only now I was driven by a stronger pull. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was need, and that's when it happened. One afternoon, I was rifling through her drawer, fingers grazing the lace edges of her most delicate pair, when I heard her voice behind me, cold and cutting. So I do have a little sister after all, don't I? My blood froze. My heart pounded. I turned slowly, caught red-handed. "Please," I whispered, "don't tell Mom and Dad." Her smile was unsettling. "Oh, don't worry, I won't," she said. "But from now on, you'll do exactly what I say. Do you understand?" I nodded. She reached into the drawer, picked out a specific pair, pink with tiny hearts, the same pair I had worn the very first time, and handed them to me. "Put them on, Mara." Her tone left no room for argument, and as I slipped them up my legs once again, I realized that what had started as a moment of childish curiosity was quickly becoming something far more serious. This wasn't just about underwear anymore. From that moment on, things began to change, not just on the surface, not just in the quiet way I borrowed panties or tiptoed through Sarah's room like a thief in the night, but deep within me, in a space I didn't even know existed, until it stirred with the first brush of silk across my skin. Sarah, for all her teasing and bossiness, didn't tell our parents. In fact, once I agreed to her conditions, she became strangely cooperative. She wouldn't just watch me put the panties on, she started offering suggestions. What matched, what looked better on me, how I should stand or sit so they didn't bunch. Over time, she began bringing out more than just underwear. There were skirts, blouses, tights, bras, things I had seen from a distance but never imagined on myself. Yet there I stood in front of my sister's mirror, watching as piece by piece, I disappeared and someone else began to emerge. It started as a game, I told myself, a way to repay her for keeping my secret. But I knew better. Every time she zipped up a dress behind me or brushed out a wig over my forehead, I could feel something inside of me settling into place. Not with certainty, not with clarity, but with a quiet, frightening satisfaction, like I had found a part of me that had been missing, misnamed, or simply ignored. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see Mark pretending. I saw someone else. Someone I didn't have the courage to name yet. Puberty arrived like a storm, adding more confusion to an already chaotic inner world. My body began changing in ways I couldn't control, ways that often felt alien and uninvited. And with those changes came new thoughts, new feelings, especially during those quiet, secret moments when I was dressed fully as a girl. At first, I was just fascinated by the softness of the fabrics, the way they clung differently, how they whispered rather than rubbed. But then, my imagination began to drift further, into fantasies that confused and excited me. I found myself picturing moments, not just as a girl in clothes, but as a girl in presence, in action, in connection. I would imagine being kissed, held, even made love to, not as Mark, but as the reflection I saw in Sarah's mirror. These thoughts terrified me. I wasn't supposed to want that. Boys didn't imagine these things. Yet when I was dressed, those thoughts came naturally, even warmly, wrapping around me like the pantyhose I so carefully pulled up my legs. I didn't tell Sarah, not about that part, but I think she knew. Maybe it was in the way I started asking for more, staying in my outfits longer, requesting her makeup instead of waiting to be offered. Maybe it was in the way my voice softened when I was in character, or how I began correcting my own posture without being prompted. She never mocked me anymore. In fact, she began treating me more gently, as if sensing how fragile my balance had become. But then, just as my world had begun to feel like it was shaping into something understandable, everything fell apart. Sarah graduated and moved out, leaving me behind in a house that suddenly felt too bright, too loud, and far too empty. My dressing sessions disappeared overnight, like a world I had built with sand, now washed away by the tide of her absence. I tried to continue on my own, sneaking what I could, stealing moments of silence when no one was home, but it wasn't the same. I no longer had my guide, my mirror, my sister who, despite everything, had held the secret version of me in her hands without crushing it. Without her presence, I was lost, emotionally starved, spiraling into silence and moodiness that my parents dismissed as teenage angst. They didn't know what I was really mourning, not just the loss of my dressing partner, but the vanishing of the only person who'd seen me as more than the boy everyone else assumed I was. The loneliness was suffocating. I walked through each day like a ghost, half present, half wishing I could climb back into those dresses and disappear completely. At 16, I was barely hanging on, numb and confused, silently mourning an identity I hadn't even fully named yet. And then came the plane crash. One call, one message, one unbearable truth. My parents, gone. Just like that. The world tilted. I didn't cry at first. I couldn't. My body locked up, numb from the impact, the weight of everything collapsing in an instant. When Sarah came back to take care of me, I was too broken to question anything. She held me through the first few nights, sleeping on the edge of my bed like she had when I had nightmares as a kid. It didn't matter that we hadn't spoken much in months. It didn't matter that we had drifted. She was there, and I clung to her as if my survival depended on it, because it did. I was 17, legally still a child, emotionally shattered, mentally teetering on a ledge. But Sarah had returned, and with her, slowly, carefully, so had the other part of me, the hidden one, the soft one, the girl I still couldn't name. Within weeks, the old rituals returned. One night, she walked into my room holding a familiar pink pair of panties. No words exchanged, just the subtle nod of shared understanding. I changed without hesitation, and when I emerged, she looked at me, not with judgment, not with sarcasm, but with a quiet maternal sort of pride. "You look good, sis," she whispered, brushing imaginary dust off my shoulder. That night, we stayed up doing makeup together, her showing me new tricks she'd learned, giggling like we were years younger. I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. Eventually, dressing wasn't just something we did in secret. Sarah began taking me out, not as Mark in disguise, but as someone else entirely. We'd go to the next town over where nobody knew us, and I would walk beside her as her sister. I still remember the first time I heard someone call me Miss, and how the word clung to me like perfume. It wasn't validation in the loud, obvious sense, but something subtler, deeper. It felt like truth, like someone had seen me, not through their eyes, but through the reflection I had come to trust. And that trust grew. With each outing, I became more confident, holding my chin higher, smiling more easily, moving more gracefully, not because I had learned it, but because it felt natural. The mirror no longer confused me. I didn't flinch when I saw myself. I began to recognize the softness in my features, the roundness in my cheeks, the way my eyes held something different now. Mark was still there, tucked away like an old toy in a drawer, but the person I was becoming, this version, this expression, felt closer to the truth. And with that truth came peace, at least in part. There were still days of doubt, of course, still moments when I questioned if I was lying to myself, or if I had gone too far down a road I couldn't walk back from. But those moments faded faster now, like shadows chased by sunrise. Looking back now, I realized that first day, The rainy afternoon, the towel, the panties stuck by static wasn't just a memory, it was a beginning. Not of cross-dressing, not of rebellion, but of identity. I had spent so long being afraid of the name for what I was that I never stopped to ask if it mattered. And maybe it doesn't. Maybe what matters is not what I call myself, but how I feel when I look in the mirror and recognize what I see. Maybe it's about freedom. The freedom to be soft, to explore, to embrace what feels right even if the world whispers otherwise. Sarah gave me that freedom when she chose to understand instead of punish, when she laughed at first, but later stood beside me, offering not just her clothes, but her acceptance. In her own way, she saved me. And now, every time I step into the world dressed as the person I know I am, I carry that gift with me. A little fear, perhaps, still lingers in the corners, but it's no longer stronger than the pride I've built, piece by piece, lace by lace, glance by glance, from strangers who smile and see me not as something broken or wrong, but simply as me. That's the story, or at least the beginning of it. There's more to tell. There always is. More layers to peel back, more truth to uncover, more memories tucked away in drawers and mirrors and whispered secrets. But for now, this is where I'll leave it. Because for the first time in a long time, I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I'm just being. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.